Welcome to episode 18 of Raiders of the Lost Art. My name is Finbar, and this is Does Technology Kill Creativity? With my good buddy Fred Goldring. Episode 18, man, it's been a journey so far. So the reason for this show is to discuss the intersection of arts, creativity, creative thinking, entrepreneurship, music, and seismic shifts in innovation, new musical instruments, decoding music, all with the effort of trying to look at where music is headed, the intersection of creative thinking into the business world and the value that the creative mind brings to this new fourth industrial revolution. Anyway, so today I've got Fred Goldring on the show. Fred is a good buddy. We used to hang out a lot when we lived in LA, and he had Music Aficionado, and I was doing Linnaeus and a whole bunch of other stuff. So a little bit about Fred. He's a media, technology, entertainment, and brand marketing sort of deal maker, entertainment lawyer. You know, he's managed a lot of, some of the biggest stars in the world. He's an executive producer and also a presidential appointee to one of the big arts. Well, I think it was the Presidential Council for the Arts. He's widely recognized as being one of the first people in the music and entertainment business to evangelize the seismic shift that's taking place in technological sort of advancements in digital music. And look, we have many great conversations, and I thought, this is a great chance today to sort of capture one of our conversations and hear from Fred's mouth, his wisdom, and his thoughts around what's happening with the current shift in the music industry with things like 3D audio, Dolby Atmos, and, how that may or may not sort of enhance or stifle the creative process. So with that, Without any further ado, let me bring in Fred on a call that I had earlier, and let's get into it. So welcome, Fred. It's so good to have you on the show, mate. It's an honor to have you on. So, I know we always have these great conversations, and I'm sure another great conversation's about to happen.
As always. It's always a pleasure and always stimulating, Finn. You're one of the guys that every time I talk to, I walk away, my brain hurts. In a good way.
Well, I get inspired. So, and thank you for being my therapist that allows me to talk, and you can just listen sometimes.
Please, I'm always happy to. Always stimulating.
So today we want to talk about technology. Is it helping or hurting creativity? I know, you've got this amazing background. You've seen a lot of changes in the industry. You've done so much, but I just thought if we can start with that and just let's see where the conversation sort of veers to. So what do you think?
Sure. Well, I think we should sort of maybe take a step back before we go forward.
Okay.
Because I think it'd be helpful to gain some perspective on this. I mean, I was thinking about this morning, just how the creators have always been creating based upon what the medium allows, right?
Yep.
And that can be a limitation. In some cases, that's a good thing. And it certainly can open things up and start to allow people to do things they couldn't do before. So going back even like to the piano roll, I mean, when people were mechanical royalties came from back in the day, and a lot of people don't realize that's actually what it was. It was a piano roll.
Right.
Going towards whether, the album and the 45, I mean, why is there a side on an album and another? So, well, there was only a certain number of minutes on an album, right? Where, I remember the days, I mean, I guess I'm not old now, but, growing up where, artists and producers would slave for weeks about what song was going to end the first side and pick up and start the second side. And there was a flow to the thing, and it was dictated by how many minutes could be held on a plastic disc.
Yeah.
And then, of course, along comes the CD, and now you have more minutes, and there's no side. And so then you get into this thing, okay, when I have more time, should I fill it up? Before I had, 8, 10, 12 songs, now I can put 15 on. It's a question of, should I? Is that a good thing? Or maybe there's too much information, there's too much stuff down, it takes away from. And so then now you have streaming, and you have algorithms, and people are writing towards the algorithms, knowing that if they're going to chart and get on these playlists, that they should have a certain formula and a certain, when the hook comes in and all sorts of things. So it's a question of, I think adaptation is probably the first thing that happens. People learn to adapt to it.
Yeah.
In some cases, that can take people off a cliff, and it actually can get in the way, in my opinion, of creativity. And ultimately, once the adaptation happens, people learn to work within the medium and they start to maybe think a little differently about how they should be creating. And perhaps it actually starts to open things up. You had things like 3D audio, you had things like 3D, visual, and
Atmos and yeah,
the 4D audio, and all that kind
yeah,
of came and went. Just because it was there didn't mean it was better for your creativity.
yeah,
Now you have things like spatial audio, where people are remixing in a way that allows, I mean, somebody said to me the other day, hi-hats weren't meant to be above your head, right?
yeah.
So now that you can mix with Dolby Atmos and put the hi-hats up here and spatial audio, and is that a good thing or is it a bad thing? Well,
Mm,
maybe it's a bad thing in terms of remixing stuff that wasn't ever meant to be heard that way.
yeah.
But ultimately, once we have this medium that allows for new creators to go, okay, if I can put sound up here and over here now, maybe I need to rethink about how I'm creating because I'm no longer just creating for these two speakers in front of me. So it's really a question of perspective, I guess.
Mm.
Love to hear what you think about that.
Well,
I
for
mean,
me,
you've
I
been
think
you've been
it's
creating with the code, and you're brilliant. You're brilliant code. I'm
yeah. Well,
curious
look,
about
I
how
always
you approach
love.
that.
Yeah, well, like I always love new technologies and I love change. And I understand a lot of people fear change, but and I think it's a mindset. And I don't think there's a right answer for either or. Personally, I think that technology can encourage creativity and it can stifle it too. Just as you sort of talked about before, there are force limitations of different sort of platforms, technologies, and they exist today. People say, well, those limitations are gone, but they're not gone. There's a certain amount of metadata. There's only an ISRC code which only allows this much. There is, in a blockchain, the Merkle point on a blockchain only allows for the way to, and then we've got, speed and scale limits of blockchain. So there's all this sorts of stuff that still exists, but I think it comes out of mindset. But I totally agree with you. I think what's really fascinating to me is that, with things like Atmos, whilst it's a great format, people are remixing stuff, and I think you raised a really great point. Do you really need to? And even if you do, who's doing the remix? Is the artist part of that process or is it just a label? And if the label's doing it, does that mean that the artist is really representing truly what the artist wanted to represent on that work, even though the label might own the work to a majority? So there's all of these sort of things. And then is that a force of creativity where the label's now making these decisions? And whatever that looks like. But I think that this constant evolution in the music industry, we seem to be in an industry where people like to not like the change and try and hang on to what they've got and to try and do that for dear life until a change forces upon itself, and then people eventually get onto it. So it's these people that sit on the front of it. And Fred, you've been at the front of technology for a long, long time. So those people that can understand and adopt and start to think about, the complexity of, well, what's good and what's bad for me. Sometimes you're ahead of time, as you well know, like you can be too far ahead of time,
That's right. That's right. Well, the other thing too is you got to also remember, like you just pointed out, there are various stakeholders that are in the ecosystem here. They're the creators, which is the artists, the producers, the writers, right? They're the record companies, which we'll call that the IP holders, which aren't necessarily the same thing in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you have the audience, right? And, you know, I remember years ago hearing about this concept. I don't know if it's actually a concept or something about in psychology called the three selves, whereas it's like how people perceive you in the world, how you perceive yourself in the world, and how you really are in the world, and how you really show up. And the goal in life is to have all three be the same thing, right? So if you kind of take that same analogy to here, right, in a perfect world, what the creator wants to create with the new technology is something that the label is supporting, that because they feel that they can make more money on it and get the artist's work out there, and the consumer, the listener, the fan, is hearing it in a way that is enjoyable, in a way that they want to hear more of it. Right?
Yeah.
Everybody's got the same thing, and they may not be the same thing. So I think that there's been a lot of blogs and things that I've been reading all around. I mentioned a little while ago this whole spatial audio thing. Right? I think that's kind of an interesting topic right now because, as you point out, it's remixing, right? Who's doing the remixing? Well, the labels are commissioning these remixes in Dolby Atmos and Sony 360 or immersive audio, and then you've got Apple's thing. And yeah, maybe that's a good thing. but maybe it's not a good thing. I mean, who wants that to happen? Are the artists supporting that? Right? I don't really know. I mean, some the people that I've read in the artist community are like, well, wait a minute, I didn't attend. I was in the studio with my Yamaha S10M monitors and right here, and that's how I heard it, and I never attended it to. I had it perfect there, and that's the way I want it. And then you have the consumers that have been hearing those particular pieces of music for a long time, and they may go, wow, this is opening up a whole new thing, or I don't know, you're messing with something that I don't want messed with. And then you have the labels, of course, that are going, well, this is another opportunity to make more money. And they're driven by the fact that they think by doing it, it'll encourage more people to listen to it because it's introducing music that they've heard before in a new way,
Yeah.
right? And they may not all necessarily be on alignment in terms of where their interests are. And I think that there may be these different conversations going on that aren't really involving the other parties, which I think can be a problem. But it's interesting to see, I remember going years ago, I think it was George Martin's son had remixed Sergeant Pepper, and a bunch of us were invited. You may have gone to this, it's like
Yeah.
Capitol Studios and some other
Yep.
places, in this whole new remix thing that took the original masters and they went back for like a year or two, and Giles Martin. And it was amazing when you're in the room. You heard things you never heard before. They were spatially different, and it was a new kind of experience. I think they did a lot of it for the Love Show too,
Right.
and it opened up in a way that. But there, you had the artists involved, and it was done with the blessing of the artist and with the people who had actually originally created involved. George couldn't hear anymore, so Giles was literally his ears. And that was a reinterpretation of something that was opening up a whole new way of listening. But it's rare that I think, and it's going to be harder to do that when you have these catalogs of music that the artists either aren't around or aren't available or aren't asked, frankly, or the producers aren't asked to be involved in the remixes. So to your point, it's remixed by people at the record companies who are just making these creative decisions that may be completely against what the original artists and producers intended. And I think that's where we get into a danger zone. We start to
Agreed.
adapt to a medium that can destroy the original underlying music, right?
Yeah.
I think it's done with the blessing of the artist, with the support of the artist, where the technology in the artist's and the producer's opinion can enhance that. I think it could be cool. But I think that's a very small percentage, I think, of catalogs. And we also now are going into an era where you have a number of these funds that are buying catalogs left and right as artists are getting older and they want to cash out while they still can and get set up for their states. And these new people who are paying these huge multiples for these catalogs are going to look for more and more ways to make money.
Correct.
Will they start to embrace technologies that are going to, in fact, ultimately hurt the works or introduce them to new audiences in a way that they weren't really intended, where you kind of you lose the what was a yeah, so there's always this tension, this yin and this yang between commerce, creativity, and technology. It's sort of the ultimate perfect storm,
It's
right?
funny to me because if you look back at history, you've got mini disc, you've got all sorts of different. You've had surround audio before. You had quadraphonic sound. You have all these things,
Correct.
and if you look back in history, when the commerce drives the decision around art, often there's a failure of take up of the art because it's driven from a point where the art doesn't lead the actual conversation or the actual delivery methodology. It's all about, okay, let's build a new format. And so I've got this existing massive catalog, and don't blame anyone for trying to look at new ways to monetize things. But when it's a multi-headed hydra, right? So if the consumer, who's the one that's purchasing it, actually then gets a product that they don't want to listen to, I find it interesting that it actually might make the original works more valuable, which is actually interesting for the people. So it could be a win-win for someone who goes and creates a piece of work that doesn't work, because then people will go, hey, I just want to go back to the original, and then drive the original sale. So it's a really fascinating type thing. It could be an interesting marketing strategy to go and, hey, we can't fail here. We're either going to drive up the value of the original work, or we're actually going to, just, you know what I mean? It's quite interesting. But I do find from a creative aspect. Sorry, go on.
No. I was just thinking something you were saying about the technology driving the commerce, right? And it made me think back on something my father said once to me that stuck with me because it was so profound. He didn't even realize he said it at the time. uh, which is that when you're trying to make an impression, that's the impression you make, right? I've always, and it became a mantra for me in terms of the way I look at everything from marketing to, and in the case of like new technologies like this, where you're trying to showcase them, it becomes, Lou, look at me, I'm a new technology. See, you can put this here and this here and this here. So you're trying to make the impression that here's the technology versus listen to this great piece of music, right?
Yeah.
Which is driving it? Is it the great piece of music, or it is here we're going to demo how cool this new technology is, the way we can do this and that? But that may not be what is the best way to hear the music, right? That said, I do think that if these technologies become interesting to creators like yourself, right, who go, wow, this immersive stuff where I can put something up here, like I said, or down here or over here, I'm going to create from scratch with that. I'm not going to repurpose old music because that's been there, done that. I don't want to mess with that. But I have new tools that now I can make something interesting I couldn't make before. And so you look at it as just additions to your toolbox, as opposed to just showcasing the tools for the sake of showcasing the tools,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So to give you an example, I'm working on a new version of the Planet Suite, my own version of the Planet Suite, which is taking orbital data and magnetic frequency data off each planet and putting into a solar system. And the way I'm working,
See, my brain's hurting already.
Yeah, but what I'm from a spatial audio perspective is trying to look at a
Yes.
like a Fibonacci sequence of a golden spiral, and then having like panning data to represent orbits through. And so for me, like as a crazy inventor, I can use these tools for that, and I think that that's a really interesting thing. Whether anyone listens to it or not doesn't matter. But for me, it's an interesting way as a creation tool. But I agree with you; it opens new doors. But you know, it's like the path is littered with skeletons of people who have built new technologies and tried to showcase them, but the formats let it down. For example, you know, virtual reality at the moment, the glasses are the biggest hindrance. You know, in the past, you know, having super audio CD where the players are $20,000. You know, like there's these inhibiting factors to actually take mass take up. It's going to be interesting to see whether people, you know, now that Apple's on board, whether they actually like or dislike this. Because obviously the data's out there now, but I'm certainly interested. But as a creation point of view, I think the technology drives some really interesting, as you said, but to the point of what we're talking about here, does it hurt or does it hinder creativity? I think it's a mindset thing, you know, it's you know, and as a mindset as an artist or a consumer or a label, they're all different. But I think you're absolutely right. Where is that synthesis, and who is looking at making sure that those 3 points somehow meet into some cohesive manner? I think that's a really interesting thing that hasn't been explored, or that I haven't heard it explored yet.
Yeah. Well, the other day we were talking, and you know, and you were explaining your project, your amazing project, I should say, the code, where you have all this hidden information and layers in there, and so people can dive as deep as they want. And one of the things I was thinking about was the ability to extract information in the future. This is sort of the reverse of what we're talking about, right? So let's say you have existing master recordings, right? Or and ultimately, or pieces of music, right? And technology doesn't allow at the moment for the extraction of more than X amount of information. But in the future, there may be technologies that allow various layers to go deeper because that stuff just hasn't been invented yet.
Yeah.
And so it made me think about, I think we talked about this, but this whole issue of that destruction and the fire of the Universal Music master tapes, where Universal will say, oh, it doesn't matter, we have digital backup safety copies. So they're basically exactly the same as the original master analog recordings, right? And of course, the ones that were recorded digitally really doesn't matter. But when they have those master tapes that were analog recordings, we have a smooth wave versus whatever sampling was done at the time that those masters were made, and that certainly has come light years since then. Have we actually lost something in those fires, right? Has there been information that can no longer be retrieved because the original doesn't exist, and the digital safety copy just isn't the same thing? I'd love to get your thoughts about that? Because
Well,
you're
as you know, I've been working for a while now with Ahmet Zappa on a sound technology that's about processing auditory and non-auditory, so things you can't hear, information you can't hear, which is the psychoacoustics, the harmonics. Most people know that they can feel bottom end because they can feel the bass, drum, but a lot of people don't understand the top order harmonics and how they might tell your brain information about height and depths and spatial elements without going into an Atmos or an algorithm that creates these virtual sort of environments. And so I agree with you, Fred. I think that there is a lot. It's like the deep blue sea or the universe. There's a lot we don't know about sound. We're finding it out through ultrasound, and we're using it in medicine, and we're using this. On one side, we've got the full-blown medical field who's using things like ultrasound to grow cartilage and X, Y, and Z. Then we have the wellness market, which are people using isochronic tones for healing, and then we have music. Yeah. And there hasn't been anyone trying to sort of synthesize the three of those, the actual evidence-based information from what's happening in medicine, what's the results-based stuff that's happening in wellness, and music mixes. And it seems to be there's these three fragmented things. And then I actually agree with you. I think that we don't know a lot of stuff about sound. There's a sound. People will say, well, how come that song, I can play it over and over and over and over and over again for 20 years, and every time I put it on, it inspires me. And so you've had the greatest minds of all time trying to analyze, is it the keys, is it the chords, is it the way it's recorded? And there is really no definitive answer. What that tells me is there's a lot still we don't know about the human physiology, and people respond differently. So people have different body makeup. So for me, I think when someone says, we've lost the original master tapes, we've got a digital copy, fine, that's great, you've got a digital copy. But the way those sampling algorithms and the dithering algorithms work, without getting technical, is they record the sound information that you hear, not the sound. A lot of them don't record the information that you don't hear. They get rid of that information. And so the question is that valuable or not? Well, I agree with you. I think that over time, we've seen advancements in recording technology. Look, I released my album in high resolution, 2448. That's a lot, miles better than what it originally was. So I think that there's a lot we don't know about sound, a lot we don't know about frequencies and how they affect the human physiology. And I think that music is a category that people think is a song. And I think we've got to go beyond just the song into the how the song creates a deeper engagement with the person rather than just a sound. And I think that that's a really interesting part of the future of where music's going. How do we all try and create music that inspires someone else or tries to create an engagement with an audience, but we think about the chords and that's great. But is there some other things that we can think about? So I agree. It's a long-winded answer to answer your question. I think
not at all.
That there is a lot more in sound that we don't understand. And just to say that we've lost these tapes and now we've got a digital copy, so don't worry. Well, there's nothing you can do about it. So there's no point worrying. But I think that there's an argument to be had around virtualizing space and virtualizing stuff that's been lost in non-auditory.
Right. Well, it's like even in space. I mean, we look up and we see stars and we look, stars and a bunch of black stuff. Well, but now we know that all that space is actually filled with stuff. It's
correct.
It's all kind of antimatter and radio signals, and it's constantly filled with it. We just don't know how to extract all the information yet, right? So one could assume that sound is the same way. It's funny. I know we touched on this the other day when we were having to have a chat, and I've been talking to some friends about this lately, because I've been trying to think about what is it about certain songs that no matter how many times you hear them, right? We're talking like thousands of, whether every time Earth, Wind and Fire September comes on, or You Get What You Get by the New Radicals, or, we can name Beatles songs or whatever it is. You've heard them at that, but it's like you never get sick of them. Yet other songs you can hear three times and you're like, ugh, I don't ever want to hear that song again.
Yeah.
What is that? I mean, what is that? We haven't quite, like you say, we know that it exists. We know that affects a lot of people that way, but we don't know why, right? We don't know what is that on a physiological, psychological level that allows those things to be repeated like so many times, and yet it's as if you're excited about it as if you've heard it for the first time again.
Well,
What is that, right?
well, I think it's fascinating because there's studies going on in dementia patients where they'll play them the bunny hop or something like that, and you'll see people come alive. And so sound, obviously, and we all know that you hear a song, Hotel California, whatever it is, Katy Perry, whatever it is, depending on your age, will trigger a moment in time of a remembrance. Oh, I remember that. Like my first date was to Is This Love, Whitesnake, like with my wife now. And, like that song comes on and I go straight back to that time. But have we explored how we make an imprint and a point in time with a song? And it's like, that's really interesting to me because, we all know that happens, but I haven't seen any studies that try and work out how does our mind imprint a moment in time to a piece of song and why does that happen? And these are really interesting questions. I'm not a neuropsychologist, but these are areas that I think the art can sort of explore in terms of developing more so than the technology of how does it sound, but how does it feel? And how do we create that engagement? And I think that's that intersection of science, wellness, spirituality, and and music. I think there's a fascinating sort of future where it's not just driven by technology. With this conversation around does technology kill or help creativity? I think this whole exploration can really enhance creativity because we're thinking through a different lens. We're not thinking about how do we technologically create an environment that's all surround. We're thinking about how do we create an engagement with the listener that has a deeper level of communication? What do you think about that?
Well, I think that's right. And it made me think about a conversation I had with my friend Rob Light years ago. And we were having this a debate, I guess is the best word, about when people's musical tastes lock in, right? And I think I remember him saying something like by age 22 or 23 or something, your musical tastes are kind of locked in. And so that's why it's harder to get people to listen to new music, even by artists they grew up listening to, even if they're great songs, because they're newer songs, right? Which is why all these bands can continue to tour year after year playing the hits, which I'm sure they're sick of playing, but they make a lot of money, so they're happy to do it. And yet they introduce a new album, and except for a small percentage of those people, they don't want to hear that. They want to hear the old stuff. And I think it's to your point about the moment in time and the thing you were talking about with patients with dementia, that maybe there is this element that triggers that emotional connection, right? That is hard to quantify. It's more a qualitative thing that allows that to happen. I mean, how can you introduce new music to people? And I argued to Rob that I think that there's probably 20% of people that will allow themselves to listen to even new artists and new stuff, and they're open to that. But for the majority of people, it made me think that he might be right about that. He certainly would know because he books all these acts. But that it's harder to get people to the old dog new tricks thing. It's hard to get people to get out of their comfort zone, and their comfort zone is like, oh, I listened in high school, I listened in college, I was learning to drive, I was learning to swim, my first date, whatever it was. And once you get into sort of adulthood, you want to recapture those moments because that was comfort food in a way, and music is comfort food on a lot of levels. And maybe that's why people, these music supervisors spend so much time and effort trying to find those perfect songs for those perfect moments in commercials and television shows and films. But it's that whole thing. It's what you say. It's a multi-dimensional, multifaceted level of how people engage with music. It's auditory, it's physical, it's emotional, which is why when you get it right, there's no better universal driver of culture than music, right? And of course, then you enter fashion and everything else. You have all these other sort of external levels that are connected to it. But at its core, just the music has so many ways that, but it also means there's a reason why 95% of the time people don't get it right, because it doesn't connect on all those levels. It really is this sort of perfect storm or multi-headed hydra or whatever we were calling it. That and now you throw this whole technology thing in there again. If I just to be the metaphor, do I want to hear a remix of September in a club that brings in all this other stuff? Yeah, maybe it's interesting once, or is that messing it up for me? Does that mess up my part of that perfect balance between emotion, physical, and and auditory, right? So I don't know the answer. I think we're good at really posing questions. I don't know if we have the answer.
Well, the other thing that is a great analogy, I've been studying with this resonics tech that I've been working on, is this the concept around harmonic based tuning rather than 12-tone temperament. And without getting too technical, in the early 1900s, a new standard was ratified whereby instruments were designed to play in tune. So there was a tuning specification which said that these are the notes of a musical scale, these are the frequencies, and that's what your guitar tuner tunes to. This is what your frets on a guitar are designed to be. So when you play an A note and you're in tune, it plays in tune with the bass, plays in tune with the piano. Prior to that, some of the ancient tuning systems weren't designed to play in tune with each other. They were designed to play along with each other. So tabla and sitar and, X, Y, and Z, flutes.
A lot of them
they were tuned to a harmonic tuning system. Now, the difference is the 12-tone temperament tuning system is a technical standard around trying to solve a problem, keeping everyone in tune. Harmonic tuning was designed to, how does the sound resonate with a human being? So it sounds good when it's in tune with a human. And so there's a quandary in mathematical equations of that as well. Then every human's different. So we need to come up with a standard. But just looking at that from a perspective is that, does technology amplify creativity? Or it's both. But it's an interesting thing when you start to go, well, why didn't we actually redevise a tuning system that's based on harmonic tuning that can still play in tune? That's a really interesting question, because what we do in Resonics is then splice a mix into 48 slices, then recalibrate the note frequencies back to a harmonic tuning baseline. Again, I'm talking technical stuff, but what I'm trying to say is that when you've put the person who's listening first, right, and the engagement of the person first, and you develop technology around that outcome, right, rather than let's create a spatial sound because it's going to sound amazing, it's going to make us sound like we're the mixes all around us, as that is the goal. I think that that's that. Does technology lead the art, or does the art lead the art, or the engagement lead the art type? It's an interesting thing for me.
Well, think about this, okay? So the drum machine comes along. Before that, we just had drummers, and we recorded them, and we would put the mic on the snare, or put the mic on the hi-hat and the bass drum and all that stuff. Drummers, even the best drummers, aren't completely perfect, right? I mean, some of them are pretty perfect, but there's a nuance that humans pick up on where it's an imperfection. Auto-tune comes along, right? And it tunes everything perfectly, right? But the truth is, it screwed it up. Because there's something about the imperfection, even the stuff you don't even know why it's imperfect. It's so slight, right? It's so almost imperceptible, but yet you feel that there's an organic thing to it. And once people started to rely on drum machines instead of drummers, well, besides the fact it was putting musicians out of business, which is bad enough, and you started to auto-tune everything to make everything sound perfect, it lost some authenticity, right? And so I think that there's an example of technology hurting, right? Just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Yeah, 100%.
Right? So, yeah.
Oh, there was a great story. One of my greatest life lessons as a musician producer, I've been very technical a lot of my life, as probably come across. But I had my friend Pearl from The Cure, the band The Cure, come and live with me in LA, and we did an EP together. And we're in my studio, and I still remember this. Pearl brought out his guitar, and we started laying down some ideas. And he started playing his guitar, and I'm going, dude, your guitar's out of tune. Just, it's slightly out of tune. My ears, it's driving me crazy. He goes, no, just record it. So I'm like, okay, cool. I'll fix it later. Because we'll get to capture the moment, right? So He played. I listened back, and I was like, as a producer, I'm going, slightly out of tune.
It's like chalk on a chalkboard.
Yeah, it was just, to me, I was like going, listening in isolation, I'm like, okay, cool. All right, cool. And Pearl's like, great, that's exactly what I want. And I started thinking, well, this guy sold a lot more records than I have. He's done a lot better in terms of his music career than I have. So, you know what, he goes, just leave it, don't touch it. So I'm like, okay, cool, I won't touch it. So then I put everything else around it, and technically, being who I am, I started analyzing the timing of how much off he was, because I was quantizing everything. When I put the mix together, his guitar came to life and was it shone right through, and it sounded like The Cure. And I'm like, oh my God, what a guitar sound. That sounds incredible. So then, being the crazy analyst, I'm starting to go through and looking at the tuning differences, and it taught me a really important lesson of like, the guitar sound that he had wasn't perfect, and that was its beauty. And it wasn't just a cliche. And it taught me then, you know what? I then started looking at the phase of having a kick drum and a bass guitar hitting on the beat. So then I started shifting everything by, 5 milliseconds, and I noticed how everything came alive. So I just started to learn how to unquantize. And that's the way I started to produce, and it just opened everything up for me. And then, when I did my code, I really worked very laser focused on not making sure everything was in time. It was such a pivotal moment in my life by listening to someone who just, being an artist, didn't worry about all the technicalities. He just played his thing and said, that sounds great. And, the technical prowess that I had, it got in the way of me allowing the art to come through. And when I did, it was amazing.
Well, what you're really saying is dissonance can be a tool.
Yeah,
right?
100%.
It's a tool that we didn't realize was a tool until it's taken away. So the dissonance it's the imperceptible difference of that imperfection, whether it's in a guitar solo or a drum beat or whatever it is, when you take it away with perfectional tools that allow it to be perfect, show you that dissonance actually was a tool in the creativity that made that thing come alive.
Yeah.
Right? So there's a case in your point where you've actually figured that out and didn't overcorrect it. But I would argue that there's too much of that going on now, right? That we've lost. Let's think about it. We used to record bands live. We didn't. There was this multi-tracking where you come in and do the guitar part and this and that. They would literally, the wrecking crew would go in or whatever. They just play and they put the mics up and people. Whatever there was, everybody. I'm sure it wasn't perfect. Because they were all playing at the same time. There were some parts, but that made it work. There was something about it. So when we record everything individually and put it back together, it's cool and it works. And sometimes it's amazing when you layer all that together. But is something lost? Why do people go to live shows? Because it's not perfect.
Yeah.
Generally, there's something about that, right?
It's that cohesiveness of playing together. Like my friend Ross Robinson, Ross. When Ross did Slipknot and Korn and all these other bands, he would get them to all play together. And he would record the playing together because it was that they were capturing the energy and the band heard each other, and then he wanted to capture that rather than each individual part because that was part of the sound, And I remember Ross saying, I would never go and build an album from individual, bits and pieces. But then you talk to someone like Steve Lillywhite and he's like, on the U2 stuff, he's like, I know I got all these little samples and I reorganized it and put it all together like a jigsaw puzzle. But then I got the band to come in and replay what I mean? But so it's interesting how people, do different things. But that energy of playing
it's a different
together.
it's a different kind of work. The jazz guys will tell you it's about two things: listening and space, right? Yeah. You got to listen to what the other people are doing and then give the thing, let it breathe, right? Don't fill everything. And so, and I learned a lot, being around friends who are jazz musicians, because, particularly playing by myself at the time, I'm always like used to filling every part in, but, which, it's a disease. And when you get into a band, you're like, no, I don't have to play the bass part. You don't have to do everything. I don't have to,
and everyone's turn the volume up.
I don't have to, bang them with the floor with my foot to keep time. So, but the jazz guys are hearing, they're listening, they're interpreting, and then they're responding. It's a conversation. You can have a conversation in a delayed basis where somebody's listening to a recording and then they're layering in their part. But I think it's a very different kind of conversation when it's a spontaneous conversation where people are reacting without thinking. There's a beauty in that. There's an art that comes from that I think you lose when you don't have the ability to have everyone in one place. One of the things, just to go back to the original thing about technology hurting and helping and the spatial audio stuff we're talking about. So, as you know, one of the companies one of the things I've been working on for several years now is my company Graph Audio, which I'm really excited about because unlike what I think some of these other initiatives, with like sort of spatial audio and remixing and that kind of stuff, we're not really about that. We have essentially, the holy grail of audio, obviously, if you can afford any kind of speakers or whatever, is to have those, floor to ceiling electrostatic speakers that are flat panel. You look like somebody popped the screen off, like, where's the rest of the speaker? And with a huge, power source, and you had to sit exactly in the room, and you had a whole room for it, and it cost, as much as a house. But you're sitting there, it's like you're listening to classical music. It's like, oh my God, I could like reach out and touch the violin player's strings. The imaging is incredible, and that's never been able to be reproduced in a smaller version. I mean, they've shrunk it somewhat because the material they use, the mylar, the membrane that moves between the electrostats, it doesn't have the same properties when you shrink it. And so along comes, this material graphene, which was discovered in the early 2000s by these scientists in England, and they won the Nobel Prize for Physics in 2010. And graphene, is the hardest. It's carbon, basically carbon that forms these hexagonal covalent bonds. Remember from your chemistry class, in this flexible field that is basically one atom tall. So it's actually it's the it's the only two-dimensional material known right now in the universe, and it's the hardest material, pound for pound, known in the universe. So what we've been able to do with graph audio is we've made the first miniature electrostatic speakers, because this thing is able to have the strength. It conducts electricity, and you can throw it and it comes back. And so in a small space, we can reproduce the sound that you get from huge electrostatic speakers without the power requirements either. So
Wow.
when these guys first came to me, they became my co-founders. My sort of brain went on and said, I watch my, then, daughters in their, early 20s, and all their friends weaned on, they love music, but they were weaned on compressed music through terrible earbuds. And so
Yeah.
they really don't know what great music sounds like. Now, one could say, oh, yeah, we're going to bring you that with spatial. But what about if you could just hear the real original music the way the artist intended to it, but
Yeah.
with better acoustics, right?
Yeah.
In the best possible way. The real, now that you got high res and 5G and all this other stuff, where streaming is going, with the ability to be able to potentially hear that in earbuds and cans and small places. We're really making micro speakers for connected devices. And the other thing is that you switch the electricity, any speaker becomes a microphone. Well, that's very hard, obviously, when you have a
Yeah.
cone and a magnet, and
Yeah.
it's not a symmetrical thing. But ours are basically,
Right.
it's a electrostat and a piece of graphene in between it. So the guys at Berkeley that invented this realized that not only is it a microphone, it's an ultrasonic sensor. So they went out
Right.
and recorded bats with it in the middle of a
Wow.
river, and went up to 500,000 megahertz and beyond. So now we actually are developing microphones that in the initial stages of recording can hear things that prior microphones weren't able to do. So we're really excited, because between the ability to record and capture more information, not mess with it necessarily, but just hear
Yeah. Sure.
more, and the
Yeah.
ability to impart that acoustically to a listener is exciting. What people decide to do with it, algorithmically, whatever, it's a whole nother discussion. But we think we're coming up with what will be the best way to hear music and to
Wow.
make music going forward. And we think we're on the road to kind of disrupting audio the way that flat panel screens
Wow. Well, look,
disrupted
I've
video. I mean, so
yeah, I've seen only on the surface a small fraction of what you're doing, and it seems like those monumental change moments. Like you talked about the CRT screen to a flat panel. It's what you're doing, Fred, is amazing, and to me, it seems like this is the next horizon. To be able to get something that small that does that much performance it's incredible. So hats off to you. I can't wait to see what you're doing and how that sort of rolls out. And to be totally honest, we could dedicate a whole episode to that. Maybe we should in the future, because
yeah,
we're all about new innovations in sound technology. And so I'd love to have you back, and we can talk, go through, show some screenshots, show what you're doing and applications, because I think that's going to be really interesting to the audience.
Yeah, no, and unfortunately, we're not in the same continent at this point.
Yeah.
But to be able to have you even hear our demo in earbuds, which we debuted at CES, I guess about, well, two CESs ago,
Right.
to rave reviews. We did some private demos, and people were blown away. And that's really before there was an earlier generation. So I'm just excited as a music fan and a creator, just for that aha moment that people can have, where without messing with the music, they're just hearing it better. The way that we used to put headphones on and like have that dedicated. It's interesting, and I know we've touched on this in the past, but and we probably did a whole episode to this, but just the whole exercise of, and I think the technology, the algorithms, the way music is recorded, the short attention span theater, the reason that, that most, I used to say to my kids, you love music. How come you never sit around, just listen to music and put your headphones on? You're doing your homework, you're sending emails, you're texting, whatever. They're like, well, why would we do that, right? Whereas we totally immersed in music, right? Yet you watch a TV show, you're not doing anything else. You watch a movie, you do something. You read a book. Why have we lost that in music? Why has music become the thing that you're doing when you're doing something? You're listening to when you're doing something.
It's become the background to our life rather than something that it becomes a foreground. Yeah.
Is it because we can't hear it as well as, meaning today's consumer hearing music for the first time, younger consumer? Is it because it just doesn't sound as good as it used to? And when we were, it's just, there's not as, to your point about like, there's this intangible thing that you can't measure. Is this compressed sound, this MP3 stuff, the streaming, the Sirius XM, all the things that just compress, take out information. Have we lost that? And that's really,
well, again, I think this
away where,
it's a big conversation. I've got my own viewpoints on it. And part of that is, I think part of the thing is that because the music industry became so commercially driven that it became algorithms about how you write a song to get ahead, to get on the charts. And because that's the goal, then everyone's writing the same music. So everyone sounds the same. So now you listen to a country act, that can be a pop act. It can be also a rock act. And the lines are blurred now. And so the artist development of people who are creating really unique stuff is a lot more limited because the commercial reality of the success of it is not there. So people end up with a very bland McDonald's thing, which isn't bad, but it's also not showcasing the art of people who are just pushing new boundaries. But look, Fred, we got to wrap this up. It's been an amazing conversation. We could talk all day, and I'd be happy to. But I think let's save some of the energy for another episode because we got a ton to talk about, and I love talking to you. You're just very inspiring, and
thank you. And you too.
Yeah, the things you're doing are just awesome. So thanks again, bud.
And you as well. So Mutual Admiration Society, my friend, and thank you it's been an honor and a pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you in person one of these days when you're allowed to travel out of Australia.
Yeah, we'll get there after COVID. We'll do something.
All right.
Thanks,
care,
Fred.
friend.
Good on you, buddy.
Bye.
Take care.
Okay.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.